But it didn't end in the public education system. It also hit tertiary education. And Tulane University is one of the clear examples of this. Tulane was founded in 1834 as a medical college, and then in 1885 was consolidated into a general arts college. It's a private university. Tulane, shortly after the floodwaters hit, it didn't receive too much damage, but was damaged. And it managed for about 6 months to pay its faculty, and it didn't have classes, but it managed to pay its faculty. Now, the interesting thing is there's a bizarre requirement in the Louisiana State Constitution that prohibits anybody from receiving money for work not done. Now, I think that was probably an anti-corruption thing or something at some point, who knows. But what it meant is, in this case, in an emergency where you had teachers who couldn't do their work because the school was shut, the university was shut down, they were getting paid. Well, that was illegal. And so they had to find some creative ways around it. But finally, in December of 2005, they realized, or they felt they couldn't do it anymore. And so they announced that between 160 and 210 faculty would be declared redundant. And they did this without any consultation and with no apparent rationale for who would be let go. The university adopted a plan for renewal, which was surprisingly similar to a plan for renewal that had been proposed prior to Katrina, but had met some fierce opposition within the school senate. And they used, again, the crisis to push forward a whole new restructuring. And the plan for renewal that was adopted almost unilaterally by the president of the university, the equivalent of vice chancellor, said that survival and recovery were not the finish line, but rather a starting point for long-range restructuring. So it wasn't just about the short-term survival of the institution, it was also about how do we develop a plan that'll be about long-term restructuring. And so the president put forward this proposal for a, quote, significant refocusing on the undergraduate experience. So the plan announced the suspension or cancellation of numerous PhD programs in the social sciences and humanities in particular, fine arts as well, social work, as part of the effort to offer undergraduates more instruction by full-time faculty. The existing faculty that were left would be supplemented with these new positions called professors of the practice, who would be full-time, non-tenure track faculty members who would not be expected to undertake regular research or service responsibilities. So they're essentially contractually limited positions that would teach only. So they're getting rid of between 160, 210 tenured faculty and hiring cheaper contract staff. And that's, that goes back to what Sandra mentioned this morning. This reflects a longer-term trend within not just American higher education, but around the world, the casualization of the sector, but also the splitting of teaching and research that we can talk about later. Now, faculty members at Tulane believe that the plan was in effect an opportunistic attempt to bring in these pre-Katrina proposals that had been pushed back, and several of which had been previously sought by the administration and resisted. Since December 2005, however, the administration has publicly announced a recovery of more than $200 million from a variety of insurance, federal and private sources. So on the one hand, it said, well, we had to do this because of financial exigency, we were broke, and suddenly, oh, and by the way, we've gotten some checks from the insurance company of $200 million. I think what's important is that the university did not freeze hiring, even though it declared some positions redundant. It still hired people, it hired these professors of practice. And according to press reports, it actually purchased an apartment building from an investor who then sold it to the university within a week after his own purchase at an estimated 30% above the market price. Not really sound financial planning. It also started building a new stadium, very important in the United States. I know for those of you who are from the United States, you know how important football stadiums are. The football coach makes more money than probably half the faculty combined. So that was Tulane University. Unfortunately, it wasn't the exception. University of New Orleans, which is a public university, a public state university, was founded in 1958. Oddly enough, they have the name of their football team is the Privateers, which has a certain ironic resonance. But a similar thing happened at the University of New Orleans. Largely dependent on state funding. Well, one of the things the state did, inexplicably, was it cut funding. It said, well, you're shut, so we're not going to give you your appropriation. So then, it creates this vicious circle where there's no students, so there's no tuition revenue, there's a big cut in public revenue, and so they're in a position where, again, they can't afford, or so they say, they can't afford to pay their faculty. So financial exigency was invoked based on the following. That they then set out a series of redundancies based on the following criteria. So they created this very complicated matrix of who was valuable and who wasn't valuable. So it wasn't based on seniority or anything, but it was based upon this new institutional mission. So the one criteria, but whether a faculty would be declared redundant or not, you would get a sort of grade, was, are you the source of a revenue stream? Do you bring in money to the institution? Check, no, okay, whatever. Do you have skills that would be difficult to replace? Okay. Have you had a record of past performance and productivity? What about your fitness for retention, which is this weird category that made people kind of wonder, what do you mean fitness for retention? You mean the non-troublemakers, right? And finally, there was another category that was simply called other relevant and compelling institutional considerations. Now, in the end, of course, what this meant is that there was no real due process in how the redundancies were actually undertaken, because the administration had created such latitude in its interpretation. Now, I think all the faculty recognized that there was a serious problem. We had to deal with it. But I think at the very least, they could deal with it in an open, transparent way that met basic standards of natural justice and due process. Finally, I just want to talk about Loyola University, which was founded in 1912, a small liberal arts university in New Orleans as well. Also was damaged due to the flooding. Damage was more significant than in some of the other institutions. But even before Katrina, again, and here you'll see a common theme developing, is the president and vice chancellor expressed a desire to reconsider the future of the university. He wanted to look at the mission, programs, academic structure, and staffing. And in 2004-05, about a year before the hurricane struck, the president appointed a university strategic task force and asked it to look at developing a plan that would be presented at the Board of Trustees meeting in 2005-06, which is around January or so, December, January. Well, unfortunately or fortunately for him, the hurricane struck in August of that year and cut short that effort. But in the president's own words, he said, Katrina, quote, provided us the opportunity to take an even closer look at our offerings and operations. So after Katrina, a new plan was announced, again without consultation with faculty or the broader academic community, and this was called the Pathways Plan. You see they have these very creative names for these things. The Pathways Plan proposed to restructure several schools, amalgamate some, eliminate others. City College, which was Loyola's sort of night school, I guess, an evening school, was closed, or was to be closed under this plan. There would be a number of undergraduate programs were going to be eliminated. Master's degrees in some programs were to be eliminated as well. And the focus would be much more narrowly on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The Pathways Plan also called for the termination of 17 faculty members. This is a small group, it was maybe less than 200 faculty altogether, so 17 is a significant amount. And these were faculty members who were ostensibly rendered redundant by these discontinuances and consolidations. Of those 17, 11 had tenure. In the American system, tenure is like a job guarantee, right? Most of them had long service at the university, and the remaining 6 were probationary faculty members who were tenure track and had already been reappointed for the following year. So already before Katrina, again, the administration of Loyola University had set its sights on a major assessment of the institution's academic programs, finances, and direction. And Katrina, again, allowed for the administration, or provided perhaps a convenient excuse to bring forward some very unpopular decisions. Now, the American Association of University Professors launched an investigation into all these cases, and there's others, because there are other higher education institutions. I just focused on 3 for right now. But the AUP investigation found, first of all, its major conclusion, Katrina provided a convenient occasion for effecting major programmatic and personnel changes without following procedures that would have been unavoidable in the absence of a natural disaster. In other words, they got away with things they normally wouldn't have got away with. The second conclusion was the condition of academic freedom in New Orleans remains alarmingly uncertain. There were a number of academics who said, you know, when we go through the list of those who were declared redundant, oddly enough, there were a couple of AUP activists, some people who had criticized the administration. Now, there's no conclusive evidence of this, but there was a sense amongst faculty that some of the so-called troublemakers had been gotten rid of. And finally, the AUP investigation found the rationale for extraordinary action not only varied widely, but also in several cases failed to invoke conditions that might have warranted the draconian steps. So the general conclusion was the proper rules and procedures weren't followed. Much like the same case when all the public school teachers and public support, or the public education personnel were all terminated as well. The point is that the institutions, the state, various private forces seem to have used the disaster as a way of promoting a certain agenda. There's a couple of things we can learn from this, and the mistakes made in New Orleans, I think. The first is the danger of short-termism, is that in many cases the institutions were looking at what's going to happen over the short term. We have a short-term problem, not recognizing that recovery is a long-term process. And that one of the problems was the state's inability or unwillingness or whatever to put money into the system when it needed to be. There needed to be some bridge funding over the short term in order to keep the institutions going. Now, many of the institutions have recovered since then, but it's been through a long, hard process, and some of them are only getting now to where they were in terms of student enrollments prior to Katrina. So I think the point is, you need a long-term commitment from government to recognize that rebuilding the education system takes a long-term time. It's not going to happen overnight. The students aren't going to come back overnight. You lose a whole academic year. It takes a long time to recover from that. The second thing I think we can learn from this is the absolute importance of keeping faculty in the loop. I think a lot of the problems that actually developed could have been avoided if the administration hadn't said, look, let's sit down and try and figure this out. Let's see if we can find a creative solution. That, I think, might have avoided some of the difficulties, but the unilateral imposition of these changes, caused some serious problems and destroyed faculty morale. One of the consequences was, following the hurricane, a lot of academics just quit. New Orleans suffered a brain drain, which it's only beginning to recover now. People didn't want to work for these institutions. This is the way you treat people? We're out of here. And finally, I think the third thing we can learn is the absolute importance of rebuilding the tertiary education system in a post-disaster area. Because the academics who worked in those institutions, many of them were the same academics who were warning about the inability of the levees to withstand a serious hurricane, who knew how to rebuild institutions, who knew how to rebuild social connections in light of what was a very serious disaster. So I'm very happy to end it there, and look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.